This is News Bits on Fuxion TV. Here are the headlines. Blade Runner Oscar Pistorius blamed for restaurant shooting in trial. South Sudan soldiers die in pay dispute at army headquarters. Trial of Al Jazeera reporters adjourns in Egypt. Reign of militants continue in northeastern Nigeria. Somalia's Al-Shabab defeated in Rabdure town. Saadi Gaddafi extradited from Niger. These and more when we return. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a second. Hello and thank you for joining me on this edition of News Bits. I'm Nikki Roberts. As the trial of the Blade Runner Oscar Pistorius continues at the North Gauteng High Court in Pretoria, South Africa, a fourth prosecution witness has testified that the South African athlete was responsible for a weapon being fired at a restaurant last year. Professional boxer Kevin Lorena told the court that he had been to Tasha's restaurant in Johannesburg in the company of Mr. Pistorius and two other people, including Darren Fresco, in January 2013. Mr. Fresco had passed his firearm to Mr. Pistorius and said, "I'm one up," meaning there was a bullet in the chamber of the gun. Mr. Lorena said, when the firearm was handed over, there was a shot followed by complete silence. He further testified that Mr. Pistorius had asked Darren Fresco, the owner of the gun, to take the blame. There are no juries at trials in South Africa, and his fate will ultimately be decided by Judge Thokozile Masipa, and much of the case will depend on ballistic evidence from the scene of the shooting. If Pistorius is found guilty of intentionally killing Ms. Steenkamp, he will face a minimum of 25 years in jail. 5 soldiers have been killed in a shooting in the main military barracks in South Sudan's capital, Juba. Fighting broke out following a dispute soldiers had with a military pay panel over delayed salaries. The government had introduced a new pay system to curb corruption, and this pay system requires soldiers and civil servants to receive their wages in person so that money is not paid into the accounts of ghost employees or to those who do not turn up for work. An army spokesman, Brigadier Malak Ayuan, on national television reportedly said the dead soldiers are martyrs. Further, that there is no indication that the fighting had spread to other areas. South Sudan, which became independent in 2011, has been a hotbed of conflict since last December, when fighting broke out between troops loyal to President Salva Kiir and his sacked deputy Riek Machar, displacing about 900,000 people. A ceasefire was agreed between the two sides towards the end of January, but they have accused each other of violating it. Peace talks hosted by Ethiopia are currently suspended and are expected to resume on March 20th. The trial in Egypt of Al Jazeera journalists and others who have been accused of joining or aiding a terrorist group has been adjourned to March 24th. The trial is widely seen as a test of Egypt's military-backed interim government and its attitude to freedom of the press. At Wednesday's hearing, 6 defendants, including Mr. Grest and Al Jazeera's Canadian-Egyptian Cairo bureau chief Mohamed Fidel Fahmy, appeared in a caged dock wearing white prison uniforms. Mr. Fahmy reportedly told the court he had had a broken shoulder for about 10 weeks and that he sleeps on the floor in a cell. He further asked the court to free him on the guarantee from the Canadian embassy that he would not leave the country. The White House, the European Union, and the United Nations have called for the release of the journalist and for press freedoms to be upheld. Freedom of speech in Egypt has been the focus of mounting global concern since the government adopted a hardline approach toward journalists. The country was ranked the 3rd deadliest destination for journalists in 2013 by the Committee to Protect Journalists. Suspected Islamist militants have torched a village in northeastern Nigeria yet again, killing at least 11 people. The Islamist group Boko Haram intensified its insurgency in northeastern Nigeria in recent weeks, and it has been blamed for about 130 killings in Borno alone since Friday. But the group has not commented on the attacks. A lawmaker, Senator Khalifa Zana of Borno Central, told BBC Hausa that the suspected militants withdrew from Jakana, 20 miles from the state capital Maiduguri, after government forces arrived. This is the 3rd consecutive night that Boko Haram had been blamed for attacks in areas around Maiduguri. The militants reportedly travel in a convoy of pickup trucks and are usually armed with assault rifles, rocket-propelled grenades, and explosives. In a goodwill message delivered in Abuja recently, the chairperson of the AU Commission, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, expressed outrage at continuing acts of barbarism and terrorism perpetuated on innocent people by unscrupulous individuals and groups wreaking havoc in Nigeria, Central African Republic, South Sudan, Somalia, and other countries. She said these senseless killings of innocent children, youth, women, and other civilians, even while they are asleep in school dormitories, recovering in hospitals, or in places of religious worship and relaxation, must stop. A state of emergency had been in effect in Borno and 2 other states since last May, giving the military extra powers to defeat Boko Haram. Ethiopian and Somali government forces have seized a key town in central Somalia from the Islamist militant group Al-Shabab. At least 12 people were killed in heavy fighting for control of Rabdure town in Boko region. Rabdure was a major Al-Shabab base for attacks across the region, and this defeat is considered significant. It would be the first town the group has lost since September, when Mahadeh in central Somalia fell to AU-backed government forces. Residents reported that the fighting lasted for several hours, with both Al-Shabab and Somali government forces suffering casualties. Al-Shabab controls much of south and central Somalia. It lost control of Mogadishu in 2011, but has intensified bombings and mortar raids in the city in recent weeks. The group has engaged the UN-backed government in an 8-year insurgency so as to overthrow it and create an Islamic state in Somalia. Saadi Gaddafi, Muammar Gaddafi's son, and his special forces commander, who fled abroad during Libya's 2011 revolution, was in custody in Tripoli on Thursday after Niger agreed to extradite him. Saadi, who had a brief career as a soccer player in Italy and often lived the playboy life during his father's rule, is the first of Gaddafi's sons the central government has managed to arrest since the former dictator was overthrown. State prosecutors wanted to try Saadi, one of Colonel Gaddafi's 7 sons, for allegedly misappropriating property by force and for alleged armed intimidation when he headed the Libyan Football Federation. He is also accused of shooting protesters and other crimes during his father's rule. At a conference in Abuja Thursday, APC leaders launched a platform for which to run against the current ruling party PDP, which has ruled the country since 2009. The leaders said fighting corruption is one of the new party's main priorities, also promising job creation, educational reform, religious freedom, and unity among Nigeria's ethnic and religious groups. 16 of Nigeria's 36 governors attended the rally, joined by other opposition leadership, including former military ruler and 2011 presidential candidate Muhammadu Buhari. The APC will endorse a single candidate who will likely face President Goodluck Jonathan, who has not made a formal announcement but is expected to run. The new opposition party has hopes to win the popular vote and then pull off the first peaceful transition of power from one party to another in Nigeria's young democracy. Power cuts have affected large parts of South Africa, including its economic hub, Johannesburg. The country's state-owned power company, Eskom, declared an energy emergency Thursday morning, stating that heavy rains had made much of the coal used at power stations too wet to burn. The utility firm provides about 95% of the country's electricity, mostly from coal-fired power stations. Major industrial customers have been asked to reduce their energy usage by at least 10%, and in some cases about 20%. The emergency was expected to be lifted by Thursday, but after 7 days of rain, power cuts are likely on Friday. In celebration of International Women's Day, the African Union Commission will on Friday hold commemorations in honor of the day. The day will also be marked by events at the United Nations headquarters in New York on the eve of the 58th session of the Commission on the Status on Women. Participants include Ban Ki-moon, UN Secretary General, Phumzile Mlambo Gunchuka, Under Secretary General and Executive Director of UN Women, Hillary Clinton, former US Secretary of State, among other dignitaries. Even Google has launched an interactive doodle on its homepage that will be displayed starting March 7th till March 9th. This is Google's 8th doodle on International Women's Day. International Women's Day celebrates the social, political, and economic achievements of women while focusing world attention on areas requiring further action. And the theme for this year is Inspiring Change. And now to sports. As this year's World Cup approaches in Brazil this June, a number of international friendly matches were played this week in preparation for the competition. One of such is Mexico versus Nigeria, which was played Wednesday at the Georgia Dome in Atlanta. At a training session on Tuesday, players on both sides expressed optimism at using the match to sharpen their skill.
Nigeria is a very good national team, and because it's going to be this game, they bring all their best players, and I think it's going to be a very good match. It's going to be tough, but right now I want to be very respectful because of that. Now the World Cup is a little bit far from me now. I'm just thinking about Nigeria to try to play, and if the coach, if Miguel decided to put me on the pitch, I just wanted to enjoy it and to show that I want to play a lot.
I mean, it's always been an exciting game playing against these guys. I mean, great game, interesting, amicable game, and we're looking forward with excitement to the game. Every game counts. Every game counts. I mean, we're looking forward to every other game, one game at a time. Now is Mexico, so we take the bits of it from this game, learn from it, laugh from it, smile from it, enjoy the moment.
The game ended in a 0-0 draw with a record attendance of 68,212. At a post-match conference, both coaches spoke of lessons learned from the game. Take a listen.
We didn't really play our style of ball, we like to play the ball on the ground, quick play, one touch, two touches. And probably because we've been out for about 4 or 5 months, we've not been together. So, playing for different teams and different style of, sometimes have an effect on what you want to do. So that's why I'm glad that we're playing a team like Mexico, that we play the same style. And I'm glad that I can see some of the young players that I brought in. And I think there's a lot of potential for us.
Good
evening. Yes, it was a good game. It was a good opponent in Nigeria for us today. There were opportunities on both sides. We only had one day to work with this team, and I think the team looked good, and the goalkeepers had a good performance, both of them, then today.
In a series of events leading up to its 18th annual reunion, the Nigerian Reunion Corporation staged a comedy show in Atlanta Sunday tagged Nigeria versus Mexico. Though it had nothing whatsoever to do with the big game in the week, the featured acts delighted fans with their comedy. Take a listen.
Another one is what happened last year that was trending. Miley Cyrus, twerking. What's the big deal about that? Flat behind. And you are making noise. Come to Africa, come and see twerking. On per second billing. They don't even need to bend as they are walking, they are twerking. Because God has endowed them with enough to twerk about. So I'm like, what are these people making noise about? Because the girl will bend down. In Africa, in fact, right now, there are a lot of twerking. And they don't even need to dance. They just say, oh, I'm going to the restroom. Twerking, twerking, twerking. That is the beauty of Africa. The top one that happened.
A lot of times you ask some people, where are you from? They say Michigan. Well, there's one thing I know about people from Michigan. They don't call it Michigan. What do they call it? Thank you. Where are you from? Charlotte. The people from Charlotte, what do they call it, Abed? Thank you. My uncle called me one time. I said, Uncle, where are you calling from? My uncle said, Idaho. I said, wait, what? He said, Idaho. I said, can you spell it? He said, hi-d-hey-hey-ho, Idaho.
That certainly had us ROTF LMAO. Do connect with us on Facebook at MyFusion TV ATL and at Twitter at Fuxion TV ATL. Thanks for staying with us on this edition of News Bits on Fuxion TV. We'll see you next time. Until then, stay safe.